was 7 when I moved into that house at Ashbrooke Lane. At least that's what my parents tell me. My recollection of that time is vague. I have memories of the big tree on our lawn, running around the garden with the boy next door, and I remember sitting in the living room floor, playing with my He-Man figures. But my most vivid memories are of the reoccurring nightmares. To the best of my knowledge, they happened every night I stayed in that house. The first time, I woke up in the early hours of the morning with a feeling I was being watched. I lay there in the dark, listening intently, scared to move in case I drew the prowler's attention. I could hear or see nothing, but that feeling wouldn't go away. There was somebody or something in that room with me. I screwed up my eyes tightly, hoping it would just pass me by. I felt the bed shake, and I stiffened up like a statue, afraid to make even the slightest movements. And then I heard the sound of raspy breathing from the foot of my bed. It moved around the side of me, then stopped. Moments passed silently, then I felt the breath on my face. Instinctively, I opened my eyes. I saw an emaciated man in a lab coat looming over me, an expression of horror etched into his pale, gaunt face, veins bulging from his forehead. I tried to scream, but he grasped me around the throat with his skeleton-like fingers and dragged me out of bed, jerking and contorting. I tried to grab onto something to stop him from taking me. He pulled me out of my room and onto the landing where I gripped the stair rail. He pulled at my arms and then at my feet, and I kicked and screamed in furious fight for my freedom. The next thing I knew, it was morning, and I was waking up in my parents' bed. They found me sleepwalking across the landing in the middle of the night. I had a lot of nightmares as a kid, which was put down to my active imagination, but sleepwalking, that was a first. I saw him again the following night. He yanked me from my bed with no warning, and this time managed to pull me all the way down the stairs. Once again, I woke in my parents' bed. My dad had woken in the middle of the night and found me lying at the foot of the stairs. I worked myself into such a panic over these dreams that my parents allowed me to stay up late with them one night. We watched TV and I strained to stay awake. I don't remember going to bed that night. I just found myself sitting on the stairs, observing the hallway, waiting for him to arrive. A grandfather clock stood in the hallway, ticking away the minutes until part of the wall opened up to reveal a concealed doorway, from which he emerged. He was wearing the same lab coat I'd seen him wear before, only this time it was smeared with blood. Whatever he'd been doing inside that room, I didn't want to find out. I watched with dread as he slowly and methodically slipped a pair of rubber surgical gloves into his hands. He tented his fingers and together. Then he turned and looked directly at me, with his intense, deep-set eyes. A pained grimace stretched across his chalky face. I rushed upstairs, calling out for help as he crawled behind me. Swiping at my heels, I ran into my parents' bedroom. They were asleep and unaware of the commotion. Before I could reach their bed and shake them awake, my pursuer snatched me up in his bony arms and started pulling me away. I managed to grab onto the door frame, and despite his efforts, he could not prise me from it. He relented for a moment, his breath heavy and labored against my neck. Slowly, he reached into his lab coat, withdrew a scalpel, and sliced deep into my hands. I released my grip on the door frame as blood dripped between my fingers. I shrieked out, but there was no sound. I could see my mom and dad lying there, fast asleep, oblivious as this withered specter hauled me out of their room and all the way down to the bottom of the stairs. I tried to claw my way back, leaving streaks of blood on the carpet and the walls in my wake. He pressed his fingers against my throat, I whimpered and choked, my limbs thrashed around in a frenzy. At that moment, the grandfather clock in the hallway let out a single chime, and he suddenly abandoned his fight. I looked up to see the emaciated figure creeping back through the door from where it came. The door sealed shut, disappearing into the wall as though it never existed. A point came where I started to confuse my dreams with reality. I couldn't tell if this was all in my mind or actually happening. To me, in the middle of the night, during the daylight hours, I examined the wall in the hallway, looking to see if there was some indication of a secret door. I told my parents and my nan about the dreams, and though I never doubted their concern, there was not a whole lot they could do except reassure me. I stayed with my parents, and I got particularly distressed. Either in their bed, or we'd bring blankets and pillows downstairs and have a sleepover in the living room. Nothing helped, though. My tormentor found me night after night, waiting until my mom and dad were asleep before hauling me away. I tried to call out, but my screams were always silent as he gripped his hand around my throat. He grew increasingly violent as he tried in vain to drag me into a secret room. Sometimes he would use his scalpel across my hands or under my fingernails. Other times he would inject me with a syringe, and it wasn't unusual for him to bite my fingers. As I prepared for the dreams, I rehearsed how I would try and fight him off. What could I grab onto as he dragged me downstairs? If I knew I could just hold out until the clock chimed, then I would survive another night, because that's when his door sealed shut. What terrified me most was the realization that if he got me into a secret room before the chime of the clock, the door would seal behind us, and nobody would ever hear or see from me again. I don't remember much about that house. We didn't stay long. We moved in with my nan for a while, and even then there wasn't much room for all of us. At least the nightmares stopped, though. And so did the sleepwalking. Of course, I never forgot about the dreams. How could I? But I figured I was just a kid with an overactive imagination, and I never considered them particularly abnormal. This is until my teens, when I started to suspect something more sinister was at play. I was looking through old photo albums with my parents when we came across some from our old house at Ashbrooke Lane. Something wasn't right about that house, I heard my mom say to my dad. This roused my curiosity. What do you mean, Mom? Well, I used to have bad feelings and nightmares when we were living there, she added. My dad tried to change the subject, but I persisted. What sort of nightmares? I inquired. I don't want to go into it, just violent and disturbing dreams. I had reoccurring nightmares in that house too, I said. You are too young to remember your dreams, my dad interrupted. You probably just picked up on something you heard us talking about. I felt insulted, like they were dismissing me. But you don't forget dreams like those. I tried pushing for more information, but they weren't forthcoming. It wasn't until I was in my mid-20s that we were able to talk about it again. I was in the living room with my parents, and my dad was reading the paper. He said casually to my mom, "Our old house in Ashbrooke Lane is up for sale again." "Nobody stays there long," she replied. "Makes you wonder." My dad nodded in agreement. "So what exactly happened at that house?" I interjected. Maybe it was because so much time had passed, or perhaps it was because I was older, but they were more open with me this time. My mom explained how she had visions of a violent murder, dead bodies lying on the floor and blood all over the walls. She claimed she felt a presence when she was alone. She would often hear crying, and it sounded like it was coming from inside the house. She also revealed to my aunt and uncle had come down from Manchester to stay one weekend, and were woken in the middle of the night to see a figure of a tall man at the foot of the bed. My aunt and uncle had passed away by this point, so I was unable to ask them about their experiences. but my mom explained that they were so distressed by the incident they returned home the next day. I asked my dad, "Did you have anything weird ever happen?" My dad has always been a very grounded skeptic, but I knew something affected him too, though he wouldn't admit it. There was just an uncomfortable feeling, he said, and volunteered nothing more. Ever since learning of my mom and an uncle's experiences in that house, I've been overwhelmed with curiosity. Like my dad, I'm quite the skeptic, and I was convinced there is a rational explanation for all of this. Even so, I wanted to know more about that house. From time to time, I would check the newspaper, and just as my parents had said, the house was rarely occupied for more than 6 months before going up for sale. There wasn't much more I could find out about this time. I'm sure the information and history were available in some archive somewhere, but I wouldn't know where to start. However, I was passing by that area one day and got the idea to drive by the house. It was unoccupied, but I saw nothing out of the ordinary, and I felt no chills or foreboding. It was just an old house. But still, I wanted to know more. I noted down the phone number on the for sale sign, and later that day I called the estate agents and requested a viewing. The lady who met me for the viewing introduced herself as Andrea. We went inside, and I immediately felt a shiver run over my body. It was probably my mind running away with me, but I got this eerie feeling. I can only describe it as like tension that lingers in the air after a big argument. If I'm honest, I barely recognize the interior of the house. My memory was very vague, but there was one area that brought to mind those terrible recurring nightmares I had as a child, and that was the hallway. I tried not to draw attention to myself and continued the tour as Andrea gave me her sales pitch. As we walked around, I was convinced that the hall and the door was hiding something. "What's behind this wall?" I asked. The look on her face at that moment could disguise none of the lies she proceeded to tell me. First, she told me, "There is nothing here." It wasn't my intention to make her uncomfortable, but I'd come this far, and I wanted some answers. "There's at least 15 feet between here and the external wall," I pointed out. I heard her mumbling on about an old boiler room that had been bricked over. She stopped mid-sentence when I started knocking against the wall. This was not my usual kind of behavior. It was as though I'd been consumed by obsession. "You know something, don't you?" Andrea asked me, a tone of surrender in her voice. "I used to live here as a kid. Something isn't right about this house, is it?" Although apprehensive, it was as if I'd freed her from an eternal silence. "It could cost me my job if I told you." "It can't be much worse than I already suspect," I said. "Was somebody murdered here?" She hesitated and took a cautious glance over her shoulder. "Do you mind if we talk about this elsewhere? I'm not really comfortable talking about it here." We decided to go to coffee, and this is what I learned. In 1953, Dr. Henry Fenton moved into Ashbrooke Lane with his wife, Mary, and their teenage son, Raymond. The upper floor would serve as their living quarters, and he had the lower part of the house converted into a doctor's practice. His office was set just off the hallway, opposite of his prized grandfather clock. Things were going well for the Fentons, and the business was thriving. And then, one day, Mary fell down the stairs in their home and broke her neck. She died instantly. Henry reacted to the tragedy by immersing himself in his work, using the practice as a distraction from his heartache. Raymond, on the other hand, was struggling to come to terms with his mother's death. With his father too busy to offer the emotional support he needed, he started to drift. He fell in with a bad crowd, started skipping school, and there were a couple times he'd been caught drinking or brawling and was escorted home by police. Henry barely noticed nor cared during this time. Once he closed his practice for the day, he would collapse into his armchair and attempt to repress his grief with liquor. Some nights he'd drink himself into a coma. Other nights he would fly into a rage, smashing furniture and throwing things around the room, and sometimes it was his son who bore the brunt of his temper. Raymond was taken in by his grandparents soon after, leaving Henry Fenton all alone in that house on Ashbrooke Lane. Later that year, on a cold autumn night, Henry was awoken by a disturbance from downstairs. Emboldened by the liquor, he decided to go and confront the intruder. His practice was the only thing he had going for him, and he refused to let some thug take that away. Henry tiptoed downstairs in the darkness. He saw the light of a torch in the far room and heard the intruder rummaging through the cupboards and shelves, probably some junkie after drugs and syringes he had kept on the premises. Henry snuck into his office, withdrew a scalpel from a drawer, and tucked into a corner and waited. The intruder entered the room, a rucksack over his shoulder and his face covered by a black mask. Henry sprung out of the darkness, brandishing the scalpel, and ordered him to drop his bag. The masked man panicked and lunged towards him, attempting to push him past and make his escape. Henry swiped out blindly as he fell backwards against the wall. The intruder staggered along the hallway and opened the front door, collapsing on the doorstep. Henry got to his feet and approached the fallen man, blood gushing from a deep incision across his throat where the scalpel had made contact. Henry pulled the mask from the man's head to clear his airways. Staring back at him in the moonlight, eyes wide with terror, Henry saw the face of his son, Raymond. His heart wretched at the sight before him. What had he done? How could he have known? His professional instincts kicked in and he sprung to action. Raymond thrashed about, choking and gurgling on his own blood as his father gripped his throat, pressing his bony fingers firmly against the wound in an attempt to contain the bleeding. He proceeded to drag him towards his office, where he could clamp and stitch the laceration. But by the time he got him there, it was too late. At that moment, the grandfather clock in the hallway let out a single chime. Patients turned up to the practice the following day to find Raymond cradled in Dr. Fenton's arms. Unable to come to terms with killing his own son, Henry had to turn the scalpel on himself, slashing his own wrists before bleeding to death on the floor of his office. And that is the tale of Ashbrooke Lane. Hey guys, Ark here. I just want to personally thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day to watch this video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed it. And I know it's been a while since I last posted a video, and I apologize for that. However, I forgot how much I enjoyed making them, so I think I'm back. I don't know if I'll be able to post as consistent as every week, but I will do my very best. And of course, it always helps when you show your support, comment, like, share, and most important, send in some stories so I'm not reading through a bunch of creepypastas to read. Because that's honestly the most time-consuming part of all, is reading through a whole bunch of stories to find one good one to share with you guys. However, I like this one. I thought it was pretty spooky, and now that it's October, getting into the Halloween spirit, why not do some more of these narrations? Because I enjoy them, I love listening to them, and yeah. So if you have any personal stories, those would be absolutely amazing. Send them to me at my email, which it'll be on screen now. And besides that, guys, have a fantastic day, and I will talk to you soon. See ya.